The sun rose on the horizon, tinting the sky with a palette of orange and pink hues, while the crystal-clear waters of Key West reflected the morning splendor. Michael Harris took a deep breath, feeling the salty breeze that carried promises of adventure and freedom. The luxury yacht, named Euphoria, gently swayed in the waves, moored at the pier. His 4 friends, James, Peter, Sarah, and Tom, were already on board, preparing to set sail. "Michael, come on," shouted James, waving from the bow. "The day is perfect." Michael smiled and quickened his pace. That would be an unforgettable weekend. He had spent months planning this trip with his friends, eager to explore the island paradise they had discovered on a nautical adventure forum. I'm going," answered Michael, getting on board. "You look like children on Christmas morning." Sarah laughed, adjusting her sunglasses. "And it's not for less. We need a break from this hectic life. Just us, nature, and the sea." Peter, the most practical of the group, checked the diving equipment. "We have everything we need. Water, food, emergency supplies. This is going to be quite a journey." Tom, always the joker, approached Michael and patted him on the back. "Relax, Mike. Let's forget about the problems and have fun. For a weekend, at least." As the yacht glided through the blue waters, Michael watched his friends fondly. They have been inseparable since college. Each had followed their own professional path, but they always found time for these annual getaways. Little did he know that under the surface of this friendship, feelings of envy and resentment were brewing, ready to explode. Hours later, the island appeared on the horizon, a secluded piece of paradise with white sandy beaches and lush greenery. As they anchored, the excitement was palpable. "We're here," announced James, jumping onto the beach. "Welcome to our little private paradise." The group quickly set up camp. They laughed, shared stories, and toasted to the future. As night fell, a bonfire lit up the happy faces, the crackling of the flames competing with the distant sound of the waves. "This place is magical," Michael said, looking up at the stars. "We should do that more often." "Without a doubt," Sarah agreed, although her smile did not reach her eyes. As the hours passed, the conversation became more relaxed and the laughter looser, thanks to the rum that circulated freely. Michael, exhausted and slightly intoxicated, retired to his tent, wishing his friends good night. "Sleep tight, Mike," said Tom, with an enigmatic twinkle in his eye. "Tomorrow's a big day." Shortly after, while Michael was fast asleep, the others gathered in a dark corner of the beach. "It's now or never," muttered James, the silent leader of the conspiracy. "He won't suspect anything." Peter nodded, nervous but determined. "Right. Let's do it." Tom and Sarah exchanged hesitant glances, but finally agreed. The plan was in motion. They quietly dismantled the camp, leaving only a small backpack with basic supplies near Michael. They climbed aboard the yacht, ready to set sail. The engine purred softly, and the Euphoria drove away from the island, leaving Michael alone, lost in his dreams, ignorant of the betrayal that had just occurred. The full moon cast a pale light over the scene, a silent witness to the act that would change Michael's fate forever. 6 months earlier, Michael Harris had always been the center of attention among his group of friends. Brilliant, charismatic, and successful, he had built a solid career as an entrepreneur in the technology sector. His recent startup had just been acquired by a large company, making him a millionaire overnight. However, this meteoric rise brought with it not only riches, but also envy and distrust. The friendship between Michael, James, Peter, Sarah, and Tom dates back to college times. They had shared dreams, frustrations, and countless adventures. However, as their lives took different turns, ties began to fray. The news of the sale of Michael's company was the spark that lit the wick of betrayal. Tension began to rise at a celebratory dinner hosted by Michael at his home in New York. The atmosphere was festive, but the smiles hid deep resentments. "Mike, you really did it, man." James raised his wine glass, forcing a smile. "We're all proud of you." "Thank you, James," Michael answered, with the usual modesty. "I wouldn't have gotten here without your support." Peter, always the most practical, watched in silence. Sarah tried to look cheerful, but there was a glint of jealousy in her eyes. Tom, usually the clown of the group, was strangely quiet. "What about plans for the future?" Sarah asked, trying to sound casual. "Have you decided what you're going to do with all that money?" "I'm still thinking," Michael replied. "I want to invest in some social projects, maybe start another startup. But first of all, I need a break. So I thought about our annual trip. How about an island paradise in the Caribbean?" Michael's proposal should have been met with enthusiasm, but the atmosphere became even more charged. Each of the friends had their own frustrations and resentments, fueled by the realization that Michael had distanced himself from them and now lived in a world of inaccessible privilege. The idea for the startup came during a beer and pizza night in the small apartment Michael, James, Peter, Sarah, and Tom shared during college. They have always been a close-knit group, driven by dreams and ambitions. It was Michael who launched the initial spark. "What if we started a technology company?" he suggested, with eyes shining with enthusiasm. "We have talent and ideas to spare. We can make that happen." James, always the visionary, backed the idea immediately. "We can revolutionize the way people interact with technology. We just need a good concept." Peter, the engineer of the group, was already scribbling on a napkin. "What if we created an application that integrates all communication platforms into one? Something simple, intuitive, and efficient." Sarah, with her talent for marketing, was already visualizing the potential. "We can call it Connect All, a name that resonates with our mission to bring people together." Tom, the programmer, smiled. "I'm on top. Let's do it." The first few months were difficult but exciting. They worked tirelessly, sharing responsibilities and exploiting their abilities to the fullest. Michael, with his charisma and negotiation skills, took on the role of CEO, leading the team and seeking investors. "We did it," exclaimed Michael one evening, entering the small makeshift office they used. "We closed an initial investment. It's the start of something big." The friends celebrated, full of hope and optimism. The late nights and personal sacrifices seemed worth it. Connect All was gaining shape and attracting attention. However, over time, differences arose in the vision of the future. Michael firmly believed in the growth potential of the company, while others began to feel the weight of financial instability and market uncertainties. "I don't know, Mike," James said one day with a worried expression. "What if we don't get the next funding? What if we fail?" Sarah and Peter shared their concerns. "Maybe we should sell now, while we have a good offer," Sarah suggested. "We can walk away with some profit and move on." Tom, usually unconcerned, seemed divided. "I love what we do, but I don't know if I can continue with this uncertainty." Michael, noticing the restlessness of his friends, made a difficult decision. "I understand your concerns. If you want, I'll buy your parts. I will continue with the company and, if all goes well, you will have the security you are looking for." After much discussion and consideration, the friends accepted Michael's offer. They sold their holdings, believing they were doing the best for their personal situations. Michael's decision proved to be the right one. Connect All quickly grew, conquering the market and attracting larger investors. Michael has become a recognized figure in the industry and the startup a success story. Meanwhile, Michael's former friends began to feel the weight of regret. They saw the company's meteoric rise and wondered if they had made the right decision. "Who knew it would go this far?" murmured Peter, while watching news about the success of Connect All. James, Sarah, and Tom shared the same feeling, a mixture of pride and regret, envy and longing. During a reunion, Michael, unaware of the growing tension between his friends, shared news he hoped would be well received. "I wanted you to know something important," he said, as they all sat around the table. "When we bought the company, I included a clause in the contract. If something happens to me, if I pass away, Connect All comes back to you." The friends were stunned. James was the first to react. "Why, Mike? Why would I do that?" Michael smiled, his sincerity disarming. "Because we started this together. I never forgot that. And I want that if I'm no longer here, the company is in good hands. In the hands of people who mean a lot to me." For Michael, it was a gesture of friendship and trust. But for others, it was a painful reminder of their own decisions and the success they let slip. Resentment, which was once a seed, now began to blossom, leading them to further question their choices and the loyalty they felt for Michael. In the following days, the tension only increased. James, Peter, Sarah and Tom began to meet secretly. Their conversations permeated with resentment and distrust. "He's always been the center of attention and well off financially," James said, his voice heavy with bitterness. "He never had to fight like us. That's why he bought from us for ridiculous amounts. And now he thinks he can buy our friendship with a luxurious trip?" added Sarah, crossing her arms. "He doesn't even realize how much he's changed." Peter, who had always been the most loyal to Michael, now felt betrayed by his friend's change of heart. "He didn't even ask how we are. It's all about him, his success, his money." Tom, the most hesitant of the group, finally gave in to the pressure of the others. "So what are we gonna do? We can't just keep pretending that everything is fine." James looked at the others, his expression determined. "We'll take the trip, but when we're on the island, we'll leave Michael behind. He needs to learn a lesson." Sarah hesitated, but finally agreed. "I agree. He needs to understand what it's like to be alone." Peter, despite his initial reluctance, also nodded. This could be a reality check for him. Tom, even with doubts about that being the most sensible thing to do, was carried away by the collective decision. "Right, let's do it." And so, the plan was drawn up. The trip to the Paradise Island, which was supposed to be an escape from problems, turned into a deadly trap. Michael, oblivious to his friend's hidden feelings, prepared for what he believed to be an unforgettable adventure, never imagining that his life was about to change forever. The full moon shone brightly in the sky as the yacht Euphoria quietly glided through the dark waters, moving away from the deserted island where Michael slept, oblivious to betrayal. The tension on board was palpable. James, Peter, Sarah, and Tom felt the weight of their actions, but the glow of greed and regret clouded their judgments. "So that's it. We really left it there," Sarah said, breaking the silence, her voice trembling. "Now, what are we gonna do?" James, who led the plan, faced his friends firmly. "We need to be careful. We will wait a sufficient time after triggering the clause. If we go back too soon, it's going to look suspicious." Peter, always the most pragmatic, intervened. "How long exactly? A few weeks? Months?" James thought for a moment. "At least 6 months. We need to make it look like we did everything we could to find him. We will make some contacts, simulate concerns, but nothing that raises suspicions." Tom, normally unconcerned, looked anxious. "And what are we gonna tell his family? What if they ask what happened?" James responded with a calculated tone. "We'll say he fell into the sea, that we did everything we could to find him, but we couldn't." Sarah bit her lip, uneasily. "What if someone finds out? If he survives and comes back?" Peter shook his head. "The island is remote. These islands can be dangerous, with treacherous terrain and wildlife. Anything could have happened. The chances of someone finding him alive are minimal. And if by some miracle he survives and comes back, we'll say it was an accident, that we didn't know what was going on. We just have to alert the police when we arrive, and be careful not to report where he is." The group was silent for a moment, absorbing the gravity of their actions. Each of them fought against the conscience and greed that had led them to this betrayal. The following days were filled with meticulous acting. James and the others informed the authorities about Michael's disappearance, feigning concern and despair. They contacted his family, offering comfort and saying they were doing everything in their power to find him. "We searched, but we didn't find anything," James said, his voice choked, as he spoke to Michael's mother on the phone. "We're not giving up. We will keep looking until we have answers." Sarah, despite the resentment, felt the weight of guilt growing every day. She often reviewed her conversations with Michael, remembering the genuine friendship they once shared. "He didn't deserve this," she murmured to herself on lonely nights, as remorse eroded her peace of mind. Peter, on the other hand, plunged into work, trying to distract himself. But doubts persisted. What if Michael had a chance to survive? What if it all came to light? Tom, torn between loyalty to friends and conscience, began to withdraw emotionally. He knew that if something went wrong, everyone would be in danger. Meanwhile, on the island, the sun was beginning to rise on the horizon, casting golden rays over the serene landscape of the place. Michael Harris woke up to the gentle sound of waves lapping at the beach. He stretched out and stepped out of his tent, hoping to find his friends ready for another day of exploration and fun. However, the beach was strangely quiet. Michael looked around, confused. The other tents seemed intact, but there was no sign of James, Peter, Sarah, or Tom. Maybe they would have woken up earlier and gone out to explore. Feeling a slight worry, Michael walked to the first tent. "James?" called, opening the entrance to the tent. It was empty. The sleeping bags were untidy, as if they had been used, but there was no sign of life. He repeated the process in the other tents, but found the same void unsettling. A feeling of discomfort began to grow in his chest. Michael started walking along the beach, calling for his friends. "Sarah, Peter, Tom, where are you guys?" Silence was his only response. He entered the dense vegetation of the island, walking along the trails they had explored the day before. His steps quickened as the anxiety grew. What could have happened? Perhaps an accident, or even they could have been victims of some crime while he slept, or a problem that forced them to temporarily move away. After about an hour of fruitless searching, Michael returned to the beach, sweaty and worried. It was then that he realized something that made his heart freeze. The yacht Euphoria was not anchored where they had left it. Michael rushed to the place where the yacht was supposed to be, hoping that it was just a mistake. Maybe they moved it for some reason, or it was stolen. But the truth was undeniable. The yacht was gone. He looked out to sea, hoping to spot the boat at some distant point. Nothing. Only the vast ocean, ruthless and indifferent. "It can't be," Michael muttered, reality beginning to seep into his mind. "They wouldn't leave me here. Not without an explanation." Panic began to take over. He scoured the camp again, looking for any sign, any clue as to where his friends might have gone. Found only a small backpack with some basic supplies. Water, some food, a survival knife, and some matches. "They wouldn't do that," repeated, trying to convince himself. But every minute that passed without an explanation made the truth more evident. Michael sat on the sand, panting. He didn't want to think that, but everything seemed to be becoming too clear in his mind. His friends had abandoned him. The friendship he considered unbreakable had been betrayed in the most cruel way. Memories of their last conversations, forced smiles, and evasive glances began to make sense. They had planned it. Despite the painful revelation, a part of Michael was still worried about the safety of his friends. What if something really happened to them? What if they had been forced to leave, leaving him behind for reasons he still didn't understand? He decided that, as much as betrayal seemed the most logical explanation, he could not lose hope. He needed to prepare to survive, and at the same time think about how to find a way to get off the island or be rescued. Michael drank some water, took a deep breath, and began planning his next move. His mind, once filled with doubt and fear, was now focused on survival. He would prove to himself, and eventually to his traitorous friends, that it would not be easy to break him. With the harsh reality of his situation beginning to set in, Michael knew he needed to act quickly. The island, although beautiful and seemingly peaceful, could become his tomb if he did not find essential resources, especially water. He looked at the few supplies he had and began to draw up a plan. "I need to find a source of fresh water," he muttered to himself, his voice firm with renewed determination. "And I need shelter. Something safer than just a tent on the beach. But for now it will serve me well." He decided that his immediate priority was to explore the island. It would take advantage of the daylight, the few resources, and the energy it still had to cover as much ground as possible. Michael began to pack his things. He dismantled the tents of his friends, carefully folding them and storing them among some rocks. "I knew I might need them later, especially if I had to travel long distances or if the weather changed." He checked the contents of the small backpack his friends had left. In addition to the survival knife, water, and food, there was also a rudimentary map of the island that they had drawn during their initial exploration. It was unexpected luck, as it gave him a better idea of the ground he would need to cover. With everything packed, Michael set out, following the direction he believed would lead to the interior of the island. As he walked, he made markings on the trees with his knife, to make sure he could find his way back to camp on the beach. The vegetation was dense and hindered progress, but Michael persisted. He knew that tropical islands often had freshwater sources, such as streams or springs, hidden within them. The hope of finding one of these sources gave him strength to continue. At the same time, he feared that the water was seasonal. If that was the case, he would need to capture rainwater and turn around with the coconuts, but all that was in the field of ideas, and he needed to focus on the now. After a few hours of walking, he began to notice encouraging signs. The vegetation was greener and denser, an indication that there might be water nearby. He also spotted various birds and small animals, which often inhabit areas near water sources. Michael continued to move forward, following the sloping terrain until he finally heard the soft sound of running water. His heart quickened and he hurried his pace, dodging trees and bushes until he came to a small waterfall that formed a stream. The water was crystal clear, rushing happily between the stones. "Thank God," said Michael, kneeling on the edge of the stream. He filled the water bottle he carried with him, drinking it in large sips. The relief was immense. Although it was recommended to boil it, he was already very thirsty due to the strong sun and did not even think about it for an hour. Finding the water source was a huge relief, but Michael knew this was only the beginning. He needed to establish a safe camp and think of long-term strategies for his survival. Decided to explore a bit more around the creek before returning to the beach. And anyway, I knew that the stream would run to the beach. I just had to follow it. The area around the creek looked promising for more permanent camping. There was enough high ground to prevent possible flooding and trees that could provide additional shelter and resources for construction. He made a mental note of the resources around him: bamboos, palm leaves, and even some fruits that might be edible. Michael returned to camp on the beach at dusk, exhausted and hungry but pleased with the day's progress. He knew he would have to move closer to the water source and start building a sturdier shelter. Tomorrow, he thought, would be the day for this new stage. Back on the beach, Michael lit a small fire with the matches he had. Realizing that the best thing to do was to save the matches, he would have to set up a fixed camp where he could leave the constant fire. Cooked some of the canned food and reflected on the day. He knew that the next few days would be crucial for his survival. I needed to keep my mind clear and my body strong. As he looked out to sea, he felt a mixture of anger and sadness at the betrayal of his friends. But he also felt a growing determination. He would survive, not just for himself, but to show everyone, including those who betrayed him, that he would not be defeated so easily. With this renewed determination, Michael prepared for bed, knowing that the next day would bring new challenges and the opportunity to transform the inhospitable island into a temporary home. The first rays of sunshine appeared on the horizon when Michael woke up. The night on the beach had been restless, disturbed by thoughts about her situation and the next steps she needed to take. He knew he couldn't waste any time, needed to prepare for a long period of survival on the island. He quickly packed up his tent, carefully packing everything in his backpack. The beach, now bathed in the soft morning light, seemed quiet, but Michael knew that freshwater safety was a priority at that moment. With the backpack on his back and the survival knife at hand, he headed back to the creek he had found the day before. The new base. The gentle sound of running water was comforting music to Michael as he reached the creek. He looked around, assessing the terrain and planning how he could set up a safe and functional camp. "First, I need shelter," he muttered to himself, as he began to collect bamboos from nearby. The bamboos were strong and versatile, perfect for building a sturdy structure. Working painstakingly, Michael cut and dragged bamboos to a slightly elevated spot where the risk of flooding would be lower. He used the knife to cut the stems into appropriate sizes and began assembling a basic structure, tying them together with vines found on nearby trees. After a few hours of hard work, the basic structure was standing. Michael covered the bamboos with palm leaves and set up the tent on top of the bamboos by covering the shelter with large palm leaves, overlapping them to ensure that rainwater would run off without penetrating the inside of the tent. He also created a simple entrance, which could be closed with a makeshift blanket made of more leaves and vines. The tent was well hidden between the frame and the leaves, so as to be well protected from the weather from possible animals. In addition to the shelter, Michael knew he needed a campfire to cook and keep warm. He set up a small campfire area next to the creek, digging a small hole and surrounding it with stones to prevent the fire from spreading. He spent all the rest of the day gathering firewood, managed to gather a good amount, but knew that he would need much more what he planned to do the next day. He used the match to light a fire and carefully fed the flames with sticks and dry twigs. Michael also began to think about ways to collect and store water. With some large leaves and hollow bamboos, he improvised a rainwater collection system, ensuring an additional source of fresh water. The sun was beginning to set when Michael finally stopped to admire his work. The shelter was simple but sturdy. The campfire burned safely, and he had managed to gather a good amount of water and some edible berries. He sat by the fire, feeling a mixture of exhaustion and accomplishment. The island, which initially seemed like an implacable enemy, began to turn into a temporary home. Michael knew he would need to explore the island further, find more resources, and maybe even think of ways to signal potential rescuers. But for now, he was safe. It had shelter, water, and a plan. As night fell, Michael lay inside his new shelter, feeling a little more hopeful. The sound of the stream running alongside, the crackle of the campfire, and the feeling of having survived another day on the island gave him the strength to face the challenges that were yet to come. He fell asleep, knowing that he had taken a big step towards his survival. The sun had barely risen on the horizon when Michael woke up. Hunger was an insistent presence in his stomach, reminding him that he had eaten very little since being abandoned on the island. He sat down and took the last can of food from his backpack. He knew he needed to ration, but he also needed energy to continue his fight for survival. After finishing the meal, Michael cleaned the area around the campfire. He laid thick logs, knowing that this would keep the fire burning longer while he was away. Satisfied with his preparations, he grabbed his empty backpack and headed to the beach, determined to find more resources. Upon reaching the beach, Michael was greeted by the sound of waves gently breaking on the rocks. The salty air invigorated his spirit, and he began to walk along the expanse of sand, attentive to anything that might be useful. His eyes scanned the waterline and sand, looking for signs of marine life or objects brought by the sea. He found some pieces of driftwood and plastic bottles that he kept in his backpack. These bottles would definitely come in handy for storing water or building something later. Michael also knew that many desert islands have an abundance of crustaceans. He approached the rocks at low tide and began to search among the crevices and natural pools formed by the waves. "Come on, there must be something here," he muttered to himself, as his hands rummaged through the pools of salt water. After a few minutes of searching, he spotted a small crab house where several crabs and mussels were hiding. Michael used the knife to free the mussels from the rocks and caught some smaller crabs. His heart raced with the discovery. Fresh and nutritious food was at your fingertips. As the search continued, Michael spotted something glowing in the sand. He approached and discovered an old fishing net, partially buried. The network was in poor condition, but it could still be repaired and used. He carefully rolled it up and put it in his backpack. Further on, he found a small plastic box that had been brought in from the sea. Inside, there was a rusted but potentially functional lighter, and also a small partially rusted pan, but that would be paramount to survival. Before returning from that search, he picked up some coconuts and drank the water from them, savoring a moment of quiet. With his backpack full of new features, Michael returned to camp. He felt energized by the discoveries and the success in collecting food. Arriving at the shelter, he checked the fire, which was still burning, and added a few more logs to ensure that it continued to burn. He sat by the fire and began to prepare the mussels and crabs. He used a flat stone to open the mussels and placed them near the fire to cook them. The smell of roasted seafood filled the air, further arousing his appetite. While waiting for the food to cook, Michael looked at the other items he had found. The fishing net, panelo, and lighter were valuable gifts. He knew he would need to fix the network and check if the cigarette lighter still worked, but he was grateful to have these features. After a satisfying meal, Michael felt refreshed. The fresh food gave him the energy he needed to continue his fight. He began to think about the next steps. I needed to explore the island more, maybe find a safer or resource-rich area. He decided that the next day he would try to fish using the net. With luck, it could ensure a constant source of food for this plan, to repair the fishing net and further explore the areas around the creek and the beach. As night fell, Michael lay down in his shelter, feeling a little safer and prepared to face the challenges ahead. He knew each day would be a battle, but he was determined to survive and eventually find a way off the island. With the moon shining in the sky, he fell asleep, dreaming of a rescue that, he hoped, was not so far away. Michael woke up to the heavy sound of rain hitting the foliage of palm trees and the thin fabric of his tent. The wind was blowing hard, shaking the trees and bringing a feeling of cold and dampness. He got up in a hurry, realizing that the bonfire he had prepared the day before was completely extinguished. The wood he had laid out to dry had been soaked by the rain, making it useless to light a new fire. Water was beginning to pool around his tent, and Michael felt the moisture penetrate his clothes. For the first time since being marooned on the island, Michael felt the reality of his isolation with all his might. Outside, the sea was rough, with waves breaking violently on the beach. The rain seemed endless, transforming the landscape he was beginning to call home into a hostile and unforgiving environment. He sat on the floor of the tent, hugging his knees to his chest. His body trembled not only from the cold, but from the wave of emotions that overwhelmed him. Fear, loneliness, and uncertainty mixed inside him, forming a tight knot in his throat. Michael let the tears roll freely down his face. There was no one there to see him, no one to comfort him. It was him against wild nature, and nature was showing its claws at that moment. Why did they do that? Muttered to himself, his voice muffled by the noise of the storm outside. I trusted them, and they abandoned me. He thought about the friends who betrayed him, the broken promises, and the pain it caused. If only they knew what he was going through now. But I knew it didn't matter anymore. He was alone on the island, fighting for his life. After a while, the storm began to subside. The rain turned into a gentle drizzle, and the wind decreased its intensity. Michael stepped out of the tent and looked around, seeing the storm-ravaged landscape. Fallen branches, leaves strewn across the sodden ground, and the beach churned by the churning waves. He could not change what happened in the past, but he could decide how he would face the future. He wouldn't give up. Not now. Michael began to collect what was left of the soaked firewood. I knew I'd have to dry it before I could use it to make a fire again. He used large leaves to protect the dry material from the remaining rain and began planning his next survival strategy. I'm going to need more protection from the storms, he muttered to himself. Looking at his shelter partially damaged by the gale, he decided that he would reinforce the structure with more bamboos and leaves, ensuring that it could better resist the weather, and he would look for one of the tents on the beach. They would serve very well as a deposit of firewood. He would only have to reinforce the floor and ceiling so as not to enter water. The drizzle was still falling gently as Michael stepped out of his shelter and walked toward the beach. The sand was damp underfoot, and the sea was still rough, although the storm was dissipating. He knew he had to take advantage of the weather lull to recover what he could. Among the stones, he took one of the tents that he had left hidden to protect from the wind and rain. Although wet, it was relatively intact. Michael dragged her back to the camp, planning to use her to store additional supplies. While on the beach, Michael also found a few more plastic bottles that the sea had washed ashore. He examined them carefully to make sure they were clean and undamaged before taking them back to camp. Back at camp, Michael washed all the bottles thoroughly with water from the creek. Each bottle was a treasure now, representing a source of drinking water that he could store up for the days of scarcity. With the bottles filled with freshly collected rainwater, he carefully arranged them inside the shelter. Now began to have a stock of water and could turn around even in the midst of future storms. Michael decided to take advantage of the time to build a small, improvised structure where he set up the tent that in the future, after the firewood had dried, he would store it. While working, Michael felt a sense of calm return to him. The task of taking care of the camp and the resources helped him feel in control, even in the face of the uncertainties of the island. Come on, soul. Show yourself a little more, he muttered to himself, looking at the gradually clearing cloudy sky. Every bottle of water, every piece of dry wood, was a victory over the adversities he faced. As the afternoon wore on and the sun began to peek through the clouds, Michael felt a slight warmth on his face. It was as if nature itself was giving him a sign of encouragement. He smiled, a feeling of hope seeping into his heart. Tomorrow will be a new day, he said aloud to the gentle wind blowing from the sea, and I'll be ready to face him. The sun rose radiantly on the horizon, dissipating the last clouds of the previous storm. Michael awoke to the first rays of light filtering through the palm leaves above his shelter. He felt invigorated by the improving weather, but hunger was still a constant companion, and he felt a certain urgency with it. After a modest breakfast of the few berries he had found, Michael set about a crucial task: repairing the fishing net he had found during the storm. He knew this would be his best chance of getting food beyond the fruits and crustaceans he could collect on the beach. Michael scattered the old net on the ground near his shelter. She was in poor condition, with some knots undone and parts torn. Using the knife, he carefully undid the damaged knots and cut off the most torn parts. With patience and skill, he began to repair the larger holes with thinner threads that he had found on the beach. "I need this network to work," he muttered to himself, concentrating on the task. He knew that fishing would be essential to their long-term survival on the island. While working, Michael thought about how he could use the network efficiently. He decided that he first needed to find a suitable place to launch it, where there was a good concentration of fish or other seafood. He also thought about how he could build makeshift baits with the resources he had at his disposal. As the repairs progressed, Michael felt a mixture of hope and determination grow within him. The fishing net wasn't just a tool. It was their connection to a more consistent and nutritious food source on the island. "I will survive here," he said to himself, as if to strengthen his resolve. "One step at a time," he repeated to himself, carefully guarding the repaired net. He had a plan now, and he was determined to turn adversity into opportunity. With renewed hope and a fishing net at the ready, Michael knew he was one step closer to ensuring his survival on the island. With the sun shining brightly on the island, Michael scattered the firewood he had collected to dry. Each piece of wood was strategically positioned to absorb heat and sunlight, essential for keeping the fire burning during nights on the island. Satisfied with his preparations, Michael grabbed his newly repaired fishing net and walked towards the beach. The tide was low, revealing the natural pools between the rocks where he expected to find fish or other seafood for his meal. Hours passed as Michael cast the net repeatedly into the crystal-clear waters. He tried different techniques, adjusted the knots, and improvised baits that he had prepared. However, the result was disheartening. The net came back empty at every attempt. "Come on, something has to work," he muttered to himself, frustrated at the lack of success. Despite the effort and patience, food remained scarce. Michael looked out to sea, feeling hunger start to bother him once again. Before giving up fishing altogether, Michael walked along the beach until he found 2 coconut trees laden with coconuts. With skill, he climbed one of the smaller coconut trees and carefully harvested 2 ripe coconuts. Back at the camp, Michael used the knife to open the coconuts. The fresh, sweet water was an immediate relief to his thirst, and he drank deeply. Then he used the knife to cut through the peel of the coconuts and delighted in the juicy white flesh. As the sun began to set on the horizon, Michael gathered the firewood that had dried throughout the day. Despite the lingering hunger, he was grateful for the small victories the day had brought. The cool water from the coconuts, the comfort of a safe shelter, and the renewed hope that with perseverance he could survive on the island. "Thank you for another day," he murmured in a silent prayer to the starry sky before lying down in his makeshift shelter. Despite the difficulties and daily challenges, Michael fell asleep with a feeling of peace. The dawn arrived with the sky tinged with pink and gold tones, illuminating the serene landscape of the island. Michael woke up with renewed energy, ready to face another day of challenges and hopes. Early on, he walked to the beach, hoping to find resources or signs of marine life, determined to spend that whole day fishing with his net. To his delight, he found a small natural pool formed among the rocks, where some fish were trapped due to low tide. Without wasting time, he cautiously approached and, with quick and accurate movements, managed to catch some fish with his bare hands. Michael returned to the camp with the caught fish, feeling immensely grateful for the providence and luck of that moment. He lit a fire using the firewood he had collected and one of the last matches, which worried him, prepared the fish to roast slowly over the crackling flames. The smell of fresh fish wafted through the air, whetting his appetite. While the fish were roasting, Michael began to build a small structure around the campfire. Using bamboos and large leaves, he created a makeshift shelter to protect the fire from the strong winds and rain that could come at any time. He knew now that it was essential to keep the fire access. While working, Michael reflected on his journey on the island so far. Each day had brought new challenges, but also moments of gratitude and overcoming. He knew that he needed to adapt and learn to live in harmony with the nature around him. After tasting the roasted fish, Michael collected more dry firewood and stored it in his makeshift warehouse. He was determined to maintain a steady supply of firewood for the cold, wet nights that might come. With his stomach satisfied and the camp organized, Michael looked around with a new sense of confidence. Life on the island would continue to be challenging, but he was learning to adapt and find resources where before there seemed to be nothing. One day at a time, he muttered to himself, looking up at the clear sky above him. He knew there was so much more to explore and discover on the island, and he was determined to continue his journey of survival with courage and hope. With the camp secure and supplied, Michael felt inspired to explore deeper into the island. He knew that each discovery could mean an opportunity to improve their survival conditions. Armed with determination, he entered the dense vegetation beyond the beach. Walking among trees and bushes, Michael followed the course of the stream until he found its source. Crystal clear water gushed from a small natural cave, creating a tranquil and refreshing pool. He approached carefully, drinking from the cool water and wiping his tired face. The discovery of the spring renewed his confidence that he would have a reliable source of drinking water while on the island. He made a mental note to further explore the surroundings of the spring in search of other useful resources. Continuing his journey, Michael advanced further through the forest until he came across a small group of banana trees loaded with ripe fruit. He was surprised to see those plants there, knowing that someone must have grown them earlier. "Fresh fruit," exclaimed Michael, feeling a mixture of joy and gratitude. Bananas would be a welcome addition to his diet, providing him with essential nutrients he needed so much. While picking some bananas, Michael heard in the distance grunts that sounded like wild pigs. His heart filled with hope at the thought of the possibility of hunting or capturing these animals for meat and other utilities. He moved silently in the direction of the sounds, following visual and sound cues from the animals. Every step was cautious, aware that any sudden movement could frighten them. Although he did not immediately find the wild pigs, Michael was encouraged by the day's findings. The creek source and banana trees were valuable resources that could ensure its long-term survival on the island. "Today was a good day," he said to himself, returning to the camp with a satisfied smile. He knew that each new discovery brought him closer to finding a sustainable balance in that challenging environment. With the bananas carefully stowed away in his makeshift backpack, Michael prepared for the night. He felt grateful for the opportunities the island afforded him, and was determined to continue exploring and learning as he sought ways to ensure his survival in that isolated place. Over the next few weeks, Michael plunged into a routine of exploration and survival on the island. Each day brought new challenges and discoveries, but also moments of progress and hope. One of the most amazing moments was when he found a stretch of sand hidden among the rocks, where various tools and utensils were scattered. Metal pots, fishing hooks, weather-worn nets, and even a sturdy hat were among the objects left there. "Amazing!" exclaimed Michael, admiring the possibilities that those discoveries represented. Each item could be crucial to your survival and comfort on the island. With the new resources found, Michael began to organize his camp more efficiently. He collected even more firewood to ensure that he would have a fire even on the wettest days. In addition, he set up another tent to store dry firewood in a protected way. Fishing with hooks and nets despite the initial difficulties soon proved successful, providing Michael with a regular source of food in addition to the berries and crustaceans he managed to collect on the beach. He was eating better and starting to feel stronger and more resilient. Despite the advances and daily achievements, Michael could not ignore the growing sense of loneliness that accompanied him. The long hours on the island, facing challenges alone, were beginning to weigh on his spirit. He missed the company of friends, the shared conversations and laughter, and the feeling of belonging to a group. "I'm making progress here, but loneliness, it's something I don't know if I can completely overcome," he confessed on a quiet night, looking up at the twinkling stars in the sky. Despite the loneliness, Michael knew he needed to stay focused on his survival. Each new day brought new challenges and opportunities, and he was determined to continue exploring the island in search of resources and hope. With a resigned sigh, He turned his energies to the next day's tasks, knowing that as long as there was progress and new discoveries, there was still hope for a future on that isolated island. On that dark, closed morning, Michael woke up feeling strangely weak and dizzy. The sky was overcast, and a cold sensation ran through his body. When he tried to get up, he realized that he had a high fever. His head throbbed, and his limbs trembled involuntarily. "It can't be," he muttered, as he crawled back to his makeshift tent. The next few days were a haze of delusions and confused dreams for Michael. He was conscious enough to know he was sick, but the high fever clouded his mind, causing him to see distorted images and hear voices that were not there, which made him deeply terrified. At the height of the fever, he found himself in strange dreams, lost in unfamiliar landscapes or stuck in unreal situations. Sometimes he dreamed of the friends who abandoned him on the island, feeling abandoned and helpless. The sense of isolation and loneliness Michael already experienced on the island intensified during his illness. He had no one to take care of him, no one to comfort him, or to simply be by his side during those difficult times. In the rare moments of lucidity between the feverish delusions, Michael felt a deep sadness and longing. He thought of the friends who betrayed him and wondered if anyone would come looking for him, now that he was so sick. Michael battled the high fever, drinking the water that was collected and stored in the tent to stay hydrated and resting as much as possible. The fever consumed Michael like a ravenous flame, casting him into a world of shadows and distorted visions. In his delirium, he found himself lying on the damp sand of the beach, looking up at the night sky where the stars danced in a chaotic frenzy. The wind whispered around him, as if murmuring secrets that he could not comprehend. His thoughts wandered aimlessly, and he felt trapped in a vortex of conflicting emotions. Memories of his friends laughing together, sharing stories around a campfire, now turned into ghosts that haunted him in the darkness of the night. The voices of friends echoed in his mind, but they were not voices of solidarity or compassion. It was distant laughter, silent mockery that accused him of having been abandoned. Each echo resonated like a dagger in his heart, already weakened by illness. The wind intensified, turning into wild howls that mingled with the distant grunts of the wild pigs he believed he had heard earlier. The sounds merged into a deafening cacophony, echoing in his feverish mind. The sand under his body became rough and cold, as if the soil was rejecting him, pushing him away from any comfort or safety. He tried to move, but his strength was exhausted, his body heavy and inert under the weight of the disease. Amid the delusions, Michael saw shadowy figures moving around him, indistinct silhouettes that seemed to watch him with empty eyes. They whispered words that were lost in unintelligible murmurs, but he felt the weight of his judgment, the weight of his loneliness intensifying with every instant. Tears streamed down Michael's face, mixing with the sweat of the fever. He screamed for help, but his voice came out as a faint whisper, lost in the turmoil of his tormented mind. He was alone in the darkness, enveloped by a fog of suffering that seemed to have no end. Delirium dragged him into unknown places, distorted landscapes that defied any logic or reason. He saw images of his own weakness, of his vulnerability exposed to the cruelty of the world. It was a visceral testimony to his deepest pain, a silent cry of anguish and despair. The night seemed to last an eternity for Michael, lost between the veils of fever and the ghosts of his past. Every second was a battle, a desperate struggle to find a way out of the darkness that enveloped him. Gradually, as the days passed, the fever finally began to subside. Michael gradually regained consciousness, although he still felt exhausted and fragile. He knew he needed time to fully recover before resuming his daily activities on the island. While recovering in the tent, Michael reflected on his journey there. "I can do it," he whispered to himself, looking up at the tent ceiling. "I'll do it." With this quiet promise, Michael focused on making a full recovery. He knew that as long as there was life and hope, he would continue to fight against all the adversities that the island imposed on him, dreaming of the day that he would be able to escape from there, saying to himself that this place would not be his grave. Michael woke up the next morning feeling relieved to finally be free of the fever. However, their relief was soon replaced by the sight of torrential rain falling outside, turning the landscape around them into a sea of water and shadows. The sound of rain hammering relentlessly on the palm leaves falling on the tent tarp echoed like a drum in his mind. Michael knew he needed food, but the prospect of facing the flood outside was daunting. With his stomach twisted with hunger, he made a risky decision. He would brave the storm to get something to eat. Michael crawled into the dense thicket, protecting himself as much as he could with leaves and branches. Water ran down her body, soaking her clothes and weighing on her shoulders. He searched frantically for anything edible, desperate to satisfy the hunger that consumed him from the inside. After an arduous search, he found some still green bananas hanging from one of the trees. Without thinking twice, he plucked and devoured them, even though he knew they were not fully ripe. The bitter taste of the green bananas was a small price to pay for some relief from his intense hunger. On the way back to camp, heavy rain turned the slippery ground into a treacherous trap. Michael slipped and twisted his foot hard, a searing pain shooting through him. He struggled to get up, but every move was a battle against the pain and relentless gravity of the storm. Finally, soaked to the bone, sore and cold, Michael managed to get back to his tent. He shivered uncontrollably, not only from the coldness that the rain had brought, but also from the physical and emotional exhaustion that consumed him. That night was an ordeal beyond any Michael had ever faced on that island. He was drenched, his foot throbbing with pain, and his hunger still not completely sated. Every drop of rain hitting the tarp of the tent was like a relentless reminder of their vulnerability and loneliness on that desolate island. The wind howled outside, shaking the flimsy walls of his makeshift abode. Michael took off his clothes and still wet cowered in his blanket, shivering with cold, wishing for a moment of peace that seemed beyond his reach at that moment. Physical pain mixed with emotional anguish, forming a whirlwind of suffering that seemed to have no end. "I can take another day," he muttered to himself, clenching his fists determinedly. He knew he needed to recover, both from the bruised foot and the terrible emotional wear and tear. With a deep sigh, Michael closed his eyes and sank into a restless sleep, dreaming of better days and hoping that somehow he would find a way to survive yet another storm, physical and emotional, on that unforgiving island. The day dawned with the rain still heavy, pounding incessantly on Michael's tent. His swollen foot throbbed with pain, making every move an ordeal. "Damn, this rain does not give respite," he muttered to himself, watching through the small opening of the tent the thick drops that fell mercilessly. Michael spent the whole day inside the tent, lost in dark thoughts. Loneliness seemed deeper than ever, exacerbated by poor physical condition. "What am I gonna do now?" he wondered aloud, resting his head on his hands. "I'm here alone, with my injured foot, no dry clothes, no food." He tried to plan his next steps, but uncertainty hung in the humid air of the tent. "I need to figure out how to take care of this foot before it gets worse," he said, trying to think of some first aid technique he could apply. "That'll pass. I have to believe that things will get better," he muttered to himself, trying to convince himself that there was a way out. The rain continued to fall outside, as if sharing the melancholy that flooded his heart. It was a melancholy and hopeless day for Michael as he prepared for another night in the tent, seeking strength where he could find it to face whatever fate had in store for him on that unforgiving island. The sun finally broke through the dark clouds that had dominated the sky for the past few days. Michael cautiously stepped out of his tent, feeling the comforting warmth of the sun's rays on his tired face. He took a deep breath, absorbing the sense of renewal that the sun brought with it. "At least something is on my side today," he muttered, looking around to assess the damage caused by the rain. As he approached the area where he had left the campfire, Michael noticed that the heavy rain had completely extinguished the fire and flooded the firewood hole. "Well, at least I have the firewood saved," he said to himself, trying to keep his spirits up despite the setback. When it seemed like things couldn't get any worse, Michael grabbed his wet clothes to stretch them out and let them dry in the sun. As he reached into his pants pocket, he felt something wet and icy. With a heavy heart, he pulled out the matches he had saved. "No, it can't be," he muttered, looking at the completely soaked matchsticks. Frustration invaded him. Matches were his only way to light a fire on that deserted island. Without them, he could not cook food, could not warm himself at night, could not purify water. It was a devastating blow to their fight for survival. What do I do now? He wondered aloud, sitting dejectedly next to the wet clothes. He looked at the vast and unforgiving horizon, seeking an answer that seemed beyond his reach. Despite the hard blow, Michael took a deep breath, forcing himself to find a solution. He remembered the survival techniques he had learned in his previous adventures. There were ways to make fire without matches, even if it was more difficult and time-consuming. I'll figure it out. I have to find a way, he said to himself, trying to forget about it for now. With this silent promise, he began to think about alternatives, planning his next step carefully. He wouldn't give up. The island might have stolen your matches, but it wouldn't steal your hope or your will to survive. With his foot still sore and limping, Michael felt a glimmer of hope as he remembered the skier he had encountered weeks ago on the beach. He rummaged through his small stash of items saved from the rain and, with a slight smile of relief, found the skier among the few objects he had. "This could be my ticket back to civilization," he muttered, holding the skier in his palm, examining it carefully. Knowing that every detail was crucial, Michael began to disassemble the skier carefully. He cleaned the pebble from the skiver, removing any traces of moisture that could compromise its functionality. "It has to work, it has to work," he repeated to himself, concentrating on the task. After clearing the stone from the skier, Michael began to test its effectiveness. He prepared a small pile of dry materials, thin bamboo chips, dried leaves, and pieces of tree bark. With the chisel reassembled, he positioned the stone on the pile of materials and turned the device, hoping to see a spark. For a tense moment, nothing happened. Michael felt the frustration threatening to set in, but then he repeated the process again and again, and then with a small crack, a spark arose and turned into a fragile but promising flame. "Yeah, it worked," he exclaimed, holding the small fire in his hands as if it were a precious treasure. Relief flooded Michael as he watched the fire slowly grow. He knew that he now had a real chance to continue his struggle for survival on the island. "I will no longer depend on matches," he said to himself, feeling a surge of renewed determination. "This fire will keep me alive, and this time I will not fail. I will keep it access forever." Carefully, he fed the fire with more dry materials, ensuring that it became stable before he began to think about the next step. He knew he would still face many challenges on that island, but that small success was a powerful reminder that with perseverance and creativity, he could overcome even the most difficult obstacles. With the fire now established and his determination renewed, Michael grabbed a sturdy branch to use as support and prepared for a journey to the beach. His foot still hurt, but he knew he needed to seek food to support his weakened body from the recent ordeal. "Come on, Michael. You can do it," he encouraged himself, adjusting the branch to ensure firm support. With careful steps and a watchful eye on the uneven terrain, Michael descended the trail that he himself had traced among the dense vegetation. With each step, he felt the pain in his foot, but the hope of finding something edible propelled him forward. Arriving at the beach, Michael explored the areas where he knew he could find resources. He scoured the rocks for shellfish and crustaceans, hoping to find something to supplement his limited diet. After some time of patient searching, Michael found what he was looking for: a natural puddle left by low tide, which contained some trapped small fish. "Bingo!" exclaimed softly, feeling relieved to see an opportunity for feeding. Michael carefully caught the fish with his hands, feeling gratitude flood his being. With the fish safe in hand, he slowly returned to camp, watching the sun begin to set over the distant horizon. "Today, at least, I'm going to sleep on a full stomach," he muttered, smiling faintly as he imagined the comforting warmth of the fire and the taste of the meal to come. As the days went by, Michael found a new routine on the island. His injured foot gradually improved, allowing him to explore more efficiently and accomplish tasks that previously seemed impossible. He found himself thriving again, adapting to the challenging environment of the desert island. As he looked up at the clear sky and felt the gentle morning breeze, Michael began to think beyond the immediate needs of survival. He knew the rainy season was coming and decided he needed a more robust structure to protect himself from the elements. "I'm going to build a huge awning to cover the entire camp," he said to himself, visualizing the project in his mind. This will ensure that I can continue here safely when the rains start, and I will be able to get out of the tent even on these days. With this goal in mind, Michael began work on the base of the awning. He carefully chose the most robust bamboos he found around the island and began to cut them into suitable segments to build the structure. Despite the hard work and the challenge of limping occasionally due to his still recovering foot, Michael was determined to complete the project. He knew that every step was crucial to his safety and future comfort on the island. As he piled up the cut bamboos and began planning how to connect them to form the awning, Michael felt a renewed sense of purpose. He was building not just a shelter, but a solid foundation for his life on the island. With the sun in his favor and determination as his ally, Michael continued his work, eager to see his project take shape and face the challenges ahead with the confidence of one who knows that he is prepared for whatever fate has in store for him. In the following days, Michael intensively devoted himself to the construction of the awning to protect his camp from future rains. With meticulous care, he dug holes to firm the bamboos that would serve as a structure. One morning, walking along the beach in search of additional resources, Michael was graced by an unexpected discovery. Among the debris left by the sea, he found a huge tarp partially buried by the sand. Although torn and worn, it was exactly the material he needed to cover the roof of the awning he was building. At least it would be a great first layer. "I can't believe my luck," he muttered to himself, examining the canvas carefully. Despite the visible tears, Michael saw the tarp's potential to protect his camp from the elements. He began thinking of ways to repair the tiers and strengthen the structure to ensure the awning was sturdy enough to stand up to the harsh conditions of the island. With renewed determination, Michael dragged the tarp to the place where he was setting up the awning. He meticulously planned how he would use the canvas, measuring and cutting it to fit perfectly into the bamboo structure he had built. As he worked, he thought about the possibilities that such coverage brought. He was building a temporary but safe home, a refuge that represented not only physical protection, but also his determination to not only survive, but thrive. With each tight tie and each well-made knot, Michael felt a sense of achievement grow within him. He was turning a piece of torn canvas into a shield against the elements, turning adversity into opportunity on the journey of his desert island life. After days of hard work and dedication, Michael finally completed the construction of the massive awning that now dominated his camp. Made of sturdy bamboo, tarp found on the beach and palm leaves expertly tied to the roof, the awning offered essential protection from the bad weather the island could throw at it. "Now we are protected, at least from the rains," Michael said to himself, admiring the finished work with a smile of satisfaction. With the basic structure secured, Michael began to think about the next step to improve his comfort on the island. A stove with a chimney would not only make it easier to prepare food, but would also help keep his shelter warm during the cold, rainy nights he anticipated. Determined to start his new project, Michael headed to the creek in front of his makeshift home. He knew that he needed suitable stones to build an effective stove, and also clay. He carefully selected each stone, evaluating its size and shape to ensure that it fit perfectly into the structure he was planning. Michael began to arrange the stones, placing them in an arrangement that would form the solid base of the stove. He worked meticulously, aligning each stone with precision, ensuring the stove was stable and efficient. As the stove began to take shape under his skilled hands, Michael felt a renewed sense of hope and confidence in his ability to thrive on the island. Each completed project was not only a practical achievement, but also a testament to his resilience and ability to adapt to the harsh environment he now called his temporary home. With the awning protecting him from the elements and the stove promising additional comfort and utility, Michael looked at the horizon with determination. He knew that he would still face challenges, but he was prepared to face them with courage and determination, confident that each new project was a step towards not only survival, but also building a dignified and safe life on that desert island. Weeks have passed since Michael began his ambitious project to turn his campsite into something resembling a real home. With the awning ready and the stove with chimney working perfectly, he set about erecting a half wall around the camp. Using natural materials from the island, such as stones and perhaps some fallen tree trunks, he reinforced the protection of the site with clay, making everything very firm, providing an additional sense of security against the elements and wild animals. As he finished building the half-wall, Michael allowed himself a moment of reflection. He observed how his hair and beard had grown, and how his clothes were now torn and worn by the hard work and conditions of the island. However, in the midst of all this, a smile lit up his face. "Look at that," he said to himself, looking around what now seemed more than a simple makeshift camp. "This is my house here, my home on the island." Michael felt a mixture of pride and gratitude for everything he had accomplished up to that point. Every stone laid, every fish caught, and every resource collected had been necessary steps to build not only a physical refuge, but also a home where he could feel safe and secure. He knew there were still challenges ahead. Desert island life would continue to demand his adaptability and persistence. However, at that moment, Michael felt a deep sense of accomplishment. He had turned a hostile place into a place where he could live, prosper, and perhaps even find a peace he had never before imagined achieving. With one last grateful look at his newly built home, Michael prepared for bed. The morning after the completion of his island home, Michael awoke with a new goal in mind: to explore and verify if there really were wild pigs in those isolated lands. He knew that catching one of these animals could mean a regular source of fresh food, something he needed to supplement his diet of fish and berries. After hours of painstaking searching around the island, Michael finally got his reward. On one of the farthest beaches, he spotted a flock of wild pigs scouring the sand for food. His heart leapt with joy at the opportunity before him. "Eureka!" exclaimed quietly to himself, watching the animals carefully so as not to frighten them. Back in his shelter, Michael began to draw up plans to capture one of the wild pigs. Using his limited knowledge, he tested improvised traps with ropes and strategically thought about the best approach to ensure the success of the venture. Using the resources available on the island over the next few days, Michael dived into this new endeavor and created simple but effective traps. He used ropes tied to heavy logs and strategically set up obstacles around the area where the pigs were most often seen. Also dug holes and covered them in the hope that some would fall and get stuck. And so over the course of that week, Michael set up his traps with care and precision. He knew that catching the wild pigs would require patience and cunning, qualities he had learned to develop during his time on the island. As night fell, Michael retreated to his shelter, looking forward to the dawn that would bring the answer to his search. He knew that the next few hours would be crucial, and he was prepared for whatever fate brought him on the hunt for the wild pigs on the desert island. After a week of anxious waiting, going to the beach day after day to check the traps, Michael finally found one of the activated traps. His heart raced with excitement when he found out that he had captured a pig, but his enthusiasm turned into a mixture of feelings when he saw that it was just a puppy. Michael looked at the baby pig with a mixture of pity and thoughtfulness. He knew that this catch could represent an important source of food, but he hesitated to kill the animal so young and innocent. "What should I do now?" he muttered to himself, while the baby pig screamed and looked at him with curious and frightened eyes. Deciding to temporarily put his worries aside, Michael took the cub to his campsite and confined him in a safe space. He knew he needed to make a decision about what to do next, whether to fatten the pig for a future meal or choose to release it back into the wild. As the baby pig sniffed around his makeshift confinement, Michael reflected on his options. He pondered the ethics of slaughtering a young animal, balancing this with the practical need for food on the desert island. With a sigh, Michael decided that he could not waste the opportunity that lay before him. He knew that in order to survive on the island, he would have to make difficult decisions and face constant challenges. Fattening the baby pig could mean a reserve of valuable meat for the future, something that he could not ignore in the face of the uncertainties that life on the island presented. At the same time, fattening it would generate expenses of already scarce resources. Determined in his choice, Michael began to think about how to care for the baby pig and ensure that it develops healthily until the right time for slaughter. He was determined to make the most of every resource the island offered him, knowing that every step was crucial to his survival and adaptation to isolated life. With a determined eye to the future, Michael began planning his next steps as the baby pig gently growled around him, marking the beginning of a new phase in his desert island journey. Michael, his heart still heavy from the difficult decision to keep the pig cub alive, returned to the beach. He revised and reinforced his traps, installing new ones in strategic places. The sea seemed indifferent to his ceaseless effort, but Michael knew that persistence was his best ally. Back at camp, Michael began building a sturdy enclosure for the pig. He used bamboos and ropes found on the beach, bracing them with stones to ensure the structure was secure. Every knot and every stake driven into the ground was a reminder of his determination. While working, Michael reflected on his plan. Fattening the pig would ensure a valuable source of protein. "It will be worth it," he muttered to himself, tightly tying the last rope to the fence. "We have to take advantage of every opportunity that the island gives us." With the enclosure finally ready, Michael took the cub to his new home. The pig, a little frightened, began to explore the fenced space. Michael watched, trying to balance his sense of relief with his empathy for the animal. "You'll be fine here," he said softly, almost as a promise. Night fell quickly, and Michael, sitting by his campfire, watched the flames dance as he reflected on it all. In the days that followed, Michael devoted himself to ensuring that the pig was well fed. He brought fruits, roots, and everything else he could find. And over time, the pig grew noticeably, and Michael felt closer and closer to the inevitable decision. "Just a little more," he whispered to the pig as he fed it. "Let's make the most of it." In addition to caring for the pig, Michael took the time to reinforce his shelter and think of new ways to improve his chances of survival. He built a small dam in the creek in front of his house. He made it so that fish could enter through it but could not get out. And with the necessary adjustments, soon the trap began to take effect, and he began to have trapped and fresh fish every morning. As the days passed, Michael began to create a strong attachment to the pig. The animal, which had initially been only a source of food, now became a constant and silent companion. Michael would spend hours talking to the pig, venting about his thoughts, fears, and hopes. It was while feeding the pig on a lonely morning that Michael began to talk about his day-to-day life. "Today, I'm going to reinforce the tent and look for more firewood," he said, as he stroked the pig. "The rainy season is not so far away, and we need to be prepared. You know, I never thought I'd be here, talking to a pig on a desert island," he commented, laughing softly. "But I think loneliness does that to us. We find company where we least expect it." Over time, Michael began to share stories of his life before the island. He talked about the startup, his friends, and how things went wrong. "They betrayed me, you know," he said, with a melancholy tone in his voice. "I thought we were a team, but money changed everything. And here I am, abandoned. But you're different. You are here with me, without any interest," I said with a certain regret in my voice. On good days, when he managed to fish or find valuable resources, Michael celebrated with the pig and gave him generous portions of the found food. "I got some fish today," exclaimed, showing off his catch. "Let's eat well tonight." Over time, Michael came to see the pig not only as a source of food, but as an unexpected friend. He found solace in the presence of the animal, which listened patiently as he navigated the ups and downs of island life. "I think you helped me keep my sanity," he once said, as the pig nibbled on some roots that Michael had brought. "Talking to you reminds me of who I am, and that I am still human, even here, isolated from the world." Despite the growing attachment, Michael knew that the difficult decision was coming. He had to balance the need to survive with the feelings he had developed for the pig. "I know that one day I will have to do it," he murmured, stroking the animal one afternoon. "But for now, let's enjoy every moment we have." With the pig now bigger and stronger, Michael knew the moment of decision was approaching. He prepared himself mentally, understanding that despite the attachment he had developed for the animal, his survival depended on making difficult choices like that. It was a stormy night on the island. The wind howled through the trees, and the rain pounded furiously on the makeshift roof of Michael's shelter. Sitting by the fire that he had carefully protected, Michael looked at the pig that had now become his constant companion. The animal, cowering in the corner of its enclosure, looked as helpless as Michael felt inside. Michael took a piece of baked fish and offered it to the pig, who slowly approached, accepting the offer. As the pig ate, Michael began to speak, his voice charged with emotion and hopelessness. "You know, sometimes I think about what my life was like before all this," Michael began, looking into the fire. "I had it all, or at least I thought I did. Friends, a promising company, plans for the future. And now I'm here, talking to you." The pig raised its head, as if listening intently. Michael continued, feeling a weight on his chest. "I had dreams, you know? Not just for me, but for all of us. I wanted our startup to be something big, something that would change our lives for the better. And for a while, it felt like we were all on the same page." Michael gave a bitter smile. But then, success began to appear on the horizon, and everything changed. He rubbed his face with his hands, trying to hold back tears. "I remember when we decided that I would buy their share in the company. I thought I was doing the right thing, protecting our dream. But they only saw the money. And when they realized that I had the majority, they decided that they no longer needed me." Anger began to bubble in his voice. "They decided it would be easier if I was out of the way." The pig continued to chew, looking at Michael with curious, attentive eyes. "Can you imagine what it's like to be betrayed by people you considered brothers?" Michael asked, his voice breaking. "They abandoned me here, hoping that I would die, all because of a ridiculous clause. A damn clause that would transfer everything to them if I wasn't here anymore." He stood up, pacing back and forth inside the shelter, feeling the rage and pain burn within him. Michael knelt near the enclosure, looking directly into the pig's eyes. "You know, I know that one day I will have to make a decision about you, and it haunts me. But for now, you're my friend. The only one I have." He took a deep breath, feeling a little relief as he expressed his feelings. "I know you don't understand all this, but you're the only thing that keeps me grounded." Michael leaned closer, his voice softening. "You don't judge me, you don't betray me. You're just here, with me, facing this storm. Somehow this is enough. It gives me strength to continue." The storm continued to roar outside, but inside the shelter, there was an eerie calm. Michael felt a weight be lifted from his shoulders as he spoke, even if it was only to a pig. "I promise we'll find a way out of here. I will not let their betrayal be the end of me. I'm not going to give them that satisfaction," Michael said with renewed determination. "And when I leave here, I will do everything possible to recover everything I lost." He leaned back, feeling a new strength forming within him. The pig, now fed, lay comfortably in his enclosure, and Michael smiled at him. "Thanks for listening, buddy," Michael concluded, his voice full of gratitude. "You're the only thing that keeps me sane in this madness." That night, under the rainy sky, Michael looked at the sleeping pig in the enclosure. He had decided the next morning he would kill him. Michael spent hours sitting in front of the enclosure, watching the pig. He held the knife in one hand, his gaze fixed on the animal that had become his companion all those months. The pig looked back at him with those curious little eyes, unaware of the fate Michael pondered. "I don't know if I can do that," Michael muttered, more to himself than to the pig. Finally, he stood up, slowly approaching the enclosure. With the knife in one trembling hand, he reached out with the other to stroke the pig. "You have been my friend, my only company in this hellish place." Michael took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision. "But I also know that I can't keep you locked up forever. That's not fair." He looked deep into the pig's eyes, feeling an indescribable connection. The knife fell from his hand, and he sighed. "I can't do that," he said, his voice breaking. "I can't kill you, but I can't keep you here either. The best thing is that you go back to your family and live free." Michael opened the enclosure, leaving the door wide open. The pig hesitated for a moment, but then walked slowly out, heading towards the woods. Michael watched him disappear into the trees, feeling a huge void form in his chest. "Go ahead," he whispered. "Be free." That night, Michael sat in front of the campfire, feeling lonelier than ever. The flames danced in front of him, but they could not warm the cold that had settled in his heart. He let the tears fall, venting all the pain and loneliness he had accumulated. "What am I gonna do now?" asked the wind, without waiting for an answer. Suddenly, he heard a noise coming from the woods. He held his knife steady, his senses alert. "Who's there?" he shouted, his voice trembling. To his surprise, the pig emerged from the shadows, returning to the enclosure as if nothing had happened. Michael dropped the knife and laughed, a laugh of relief and happiness. "You're back," he exclaimed, kneeling next to the pig. "Where have you been, huh? I missed you so much." The pig looked at him with the same curious eyes, and Michael smiled, stroking his head. "I think we're in this together, right?" he said, in a lighter tone of voice. "We will survive, my friend. Together." That night, Michael went to sleep with a lighter heart. He was still trapped on that deserted island, but now he was not completely alone. The pig, his silent and loyal companion, was at his side, and together, they would face any challenge that came their way. The next morning, Michael woke up feeling a new sense of hope. Seeing the pig, which was now lying in front of the shelter, decided it was time to give it a name. "I'll call you Buddy," said Michael, stroking the animal with a smile on his face. "I think you deserve a name. After all, you are my best friend here." Buddy raised his head and grunted, as if approving of the name. Michael laughed and gave her a piece of fruit he had saved. As the days went by, Michael and Buddy became an inseparable duo. Together, they explored the island in search of new resources. Michael was amazed by Buddy's intelligence and curiosity, which often guided him to places he had never noticed before. "Look at that, Buddy," exclaimed Michael, finding a group of trees laden with mangoes. "You really know where to find the good stuff, huh?" Buddy grunted in response, and Michael laughed, picking as many sleeves as he could carry. "Let's get these back to camp. It will be nice to have a variety of fruits to eat." Back at camp, Michael began planning improvements to his house. With the new resources he found, he was able to strengthen the bamboo and canvas roof, making it more resistant to rain. He built new warehouses to store food and water, and even a small vegetable garden, where he began to grow seeds that he found around the island. Buddy was always around, helping as he could. Michael taught him to recognize different plants and fruits, which greatly facilitated life on the island. "You really are a good fellow, Buddy," said Michael, as they both rested in the shade of a tree. "I don't know what I'd do without you." Buddy looked at Michael with his curious eyes, and Michael felt that somehow the pig understood his gratitude. Time on the island passed differently now. Michael no longer felt so alone, and Buddy's presence gave him a new perspective on life. Together, they explored, discovered, and faced the challenges the island presented. "I think we're gonna be okay, Buddy," said Michael, looking at the horizon with a smile on his face. "With you by my side, I feel that we can face anything." Buddy grunted in agreement, and Michael laughed, feeling a deep peace in his heart. He knew that as long as they had each other, it didn't matter how uncertain the future was. They were on this journey together, and that was all that mattered. The sun was already high in the sky when Michael realized that a year had passed since he had been abandoned on the island. At least by his accounts, he believed a year had passed. Time seemed to have flown, and at the same time dragged on. Sitting on the sand, looking at the endless sea, he let his thoughts wander. Buddy was next to him, lying on the sand, watching the horizon with the same interest. Michael gently stroked the pig's head, which let out a satisfied grunt. "You think someone's looking for me, Buddy?" Michael asked, his voice heavy with uncertainty and sadness. "Do they still remember me?" He sighed, feeling the weight of emotions accumulated over the past year. He looked out to sea, as if waiting for the answer to come from the waves that gently broke on the beach. "Sometimes I wonder how things are out there," he continued. "Is the company doing well? Are they profiting from everything we've built together? What about my family? My parents, my brothers? They must be desperate. Or maybe they've lost hope." Michael felt a lump form in his throat. There were days when the loneliness was unbearable, and others when Buddy's presence made everything easier to bear. But on that day, the absence of any sign of rescue was particularly painful. "I don't know how much longer we'll have to stay here," he said, more to himself than to Buddy. "Sometimes it feels like I'm going to be stuck on this island forever. And other times, I feel like something is going to change, that I'm going to find a way out of here." Buddy grunted and looked at Michael with his intelligent eyes, as if saying that everything would be fine. Michael smiled, feeling somewhat comforted by the faithful presence of the animal. "You're a good friend, Buddy," he said, stroking the pig again. "I don't know what I'd do without you." The day passed slowly, with Michael sitting on the beach, lost in his thoughts. He knew he couldn't afford to give up. There was still a spark of hope within him, a small flame that refused to be extinguished. "We'll keep trying," he said, more determined. "One day, somehow, we'll get out of here. And when that happens, I'm going to make sure everyone knows the truth." Buddy looked at him, letting out a soft grunt. Michael laughed and stood up, stretching his arms to the sky. "Come on, Buddy. We have a lot of work to do. We can't let this place defeat us so easily." Time continued to pass, and Michael found himself increasingly determined to try a new strategy. He looked at Buddy, who was watching him intently, as if he understood what was about to happen. "You know, Buddy, I've been thinking a lot," said Michael, while stroking the pig. "I think I'll build a raft. Not that I really believe we're going to get out of here like this, but I can't just stand by and wait." Buddy grunted, tilting his head to the side, and Michael smiled. "Don't worry. I know it's practically impossible to get off the island like this, but if some miracle happens and I make it, I promise I'll come back for you. I'm not leaving you here alone." With that decision made, Michael began collecting empty plastic bottles, pieces of styrofoam, and anything he could find in the sand that could serve as the base for the raft. He knew construction would be a challenge, but he also knew he needed to do something to keep hope alive. The days passed as he worked diligently on the construction of the raft. Buddy was always around, watching Michael's every move. The pig seemed to understand the importance of what his human friend was doing, and his constant presence gave Michael the necessary strength to continue. "Look at that, Buddy," said Michael one day, holding a large amount of plastic bottles. "With that, we can make the base of the raft. It will give us the buoyancy we need." He began tying the bottles together with makeshift ropes, using pieces of netting and other materials he found on the beach. Each day was a new battle against the elements, but also a new chance to advance. "It will be difficult, but we need to try," said Michael, more to himself than to Buddy. "We can't give up now." The days went by and the raft began to take shape. Michael felt a mixture of hope and despair, knowing the likelihood of success was minimal, but determined to try anyway. "If we get out of here, Buddy, I promise you that you will be the most famous pig in the world," he said, laughing. "But if we can't, at least we try. And this is already something." Buddy grunted in response, as if agreeing. Michael smiled, feeling a new surge of determination. "Let's continue, my friend. One step at a time. One day at a time. Let's build this raft and see what the future holds." With the raft finished, on a sunny day, Michael decided it was time. He pushed the carefully constructed raft into the water, with Buddy watching from the beach. Michael's heart was racing as he prepared for the trip. "I'm coming back for you, Buddy," he said, looking at the pig with a mixture of hope and anxiety. "Take care of everything here until I get back." With these words, he climbed into the raft and began to row, slowly moving away from the island. The water was calm and the sun shone in the sky, but the feeling of restlessness did not leave him. Each paddle took him further away from the place he had called home for so long, but it also brought him closer to a chance at rescue. For quite a while, Michael rowed toward the horizon, keeping faith that he could achieve some form of salvation. However, reality turned out to be more cruel than he expected. The waves began to get stronger, and the raft, made of improvised materials, could not resist. Suddenly, he felt the structure give way under his feet. "No, no, no," shouted Michael, desperately trying to keep the raft together. But it was too late. The pieces began to come loose, and he was thrown into the water. Desperate, Michael fought the waves, trying to stay afloat. Every movement seemed to drain him of his last strength, and he felt the cold water pulling him down. He clung desperately to a large piece of wood that was still floating and, in a last desperate effort, swam towards the beach, feeling weaker and weaker. When he finally reached the shore, he collapsed on the sand, panting and exhausted. He lay there, trying to catch his breath, as the reality of the failure hit him hard. In the days that followed, Michael was deeply shaken. Sitting by the extinguished fire, he reflected on his failed attempt. "I really thought it might work, Buddy," he said, looking at the pig that now stood next to him, as usual. "But I failed. I got so close, and at the same time, so far." Buddy grunted, laying his head on Michael's lap, who gently stroked the animal. "What do I do now?" he asked, more to himself than to Buddy. "How can I keep trying when everything seems so impossible?" The failure of the raft left him embittered and pensive. Each moment seemed a reminder of their isolation and the increasingly remote chances of rescue. But despite the sadness and despair, Michael knew that he could not give up. I had to find a new way, no matter how hard it was. Let's get through this, buddy, he said finally, with a renewed determination in his voice. Somehow we'll find a way out. I promise. Time followed relentless, and successes and failures were lost along him. Michael was learning to know every corner of the island. He explored every piece of land, every tree, every stream. On one of his forays through the dense forest, he discovered a small cave, hidden behind a curtain of foliage. The cave was a perfect refuge, protected from the elements and a good place to store some of its most valuable resources. Over the months, he developed an impressive skill at catching birds with his ingenious traps, ensuring a constant source of protein. However, out of respect for Buddy, he had never slaughtered one of the wild pigs that roamed the island. "You're like family to me, Buddy," said Michael one day, while stroking the pig. "I cannot kill your relatives, no matter how hungry I may be." Buddy grunted in response, seeming to understand Michael's words. Michael also managed to capture different resources of the island. He collected coconuts, bananas, berries, and edible roots, making his diet more varied and nutritious. In addition, his small vegetable garden already yielded blackberries, and he began to replant the banana trees in strategic places. The cave he had discovered became an important place in his routine. He used it as a warehouse to store his tools and materials that he built, and that from time to time appeared carried by the tide to the sand of the beach, protecting them from the weather. He had built an even more solid shelter and spread other shelters at strategic points on the island, which allowed him to move more easily, since fire was no longer a problem for him, since he had mastered the art of creating it with friction. The awning he had built months earlier continued to protect him from the heavy rains, and the stove with chimney he had set up offered warmth and an efficient means of cooking. "Look at us, Buddy," said Michael one day, sitting in front of the crackling fire. "Who knew we could turn this place into a home?" "Huh?" He smiled, watching the dancing flame. Buddy was lying next to her, snoring softly. Michael had adapted to life on the island in a way he had never imagined possible. His clothes were patched and shabby, but he felt a certain comfort in that routine. There were moments of deep loneliness, of course, but there was also a peace I had never experienced before. The island, with all its desolation, had given him a sense of purpose and survival. "It's not ideal, Buddy, but we're living," he said, while looking at the stars that shone in the sky. "And who knows, one day we can get out of here. Until then, we'll do the best we can." One day, as they walked along the beach unpretentiously collecting resources, Michael and Buddy spotted something on the horizon. A gigantic form, an imposing silhouette cutting the sea. Michael blinked his eyes several times, trying to confirm what he saw. "Buddy, look," exclaimed Michael, pointing in the direction of the ship. "It's a ship. We're saved." He dropped everything he was doing and ran desperately across the beach towards the campfire he kept burning near his shelter. Michael's hands trembled as he piled more firewood over the embers, causing the flames to crackle and shoot thick columns of black smoke into the sky. "Please see the smoke," he shouted, hoping that the crew of the ship would see his distress signal. Buddy grunted beside him, looking as hopeful as Michael. The eyes of both were fixed on the ship, which seemed to be getting closer and closer. For a moment, Michael felt a mixture of relief and euphoria, thinking that he would finally be rescued after so long on that deserted island. However, as the ship approached, a terrible sense of despair began to form in his chest. The ship seemed to be changing course, slowly moving away from the island. "No, it can't be," Michael muttered, watching helplessly as the ship was lost on the horizon. Tears began to sprout in her eyes, mixing with the smoke from the campfire. He sat heavily on the sand, feeling a wave of frustration and helplessness wash over him. Why didn't they see it?" Michael questioned, looking at the vast sea that now seemed emptier than ever. Buddy lay down next to him, emitting soft grunts as if trying to console him. Michael stroked the pig, feeling lost in a sea of emotions. All his effort, all his hope of being found, seemed to have been in vain at that moment. "I thought finally," he began, but his words were choked by the lump in his throat. He stood there for a long time, watching the empty horizon, until the pain of disappointment began to mix with renewed determination. I wouldn't give up so easily. The island had taught him that, among other things. "Never mind, buddy. Let's keep trying," he said finally, rising with a deep sigh. "Let's go back to camp and think about what we can do next." Buddy grunted in response, following Michael back to the shelter. Smoke from the campfire continued to rise into the sky, a constant reminder of his presence on the island and his hope of one day being rescued. After this episode, Michael felt determined to prepare himself as best he could in case another ship appeared on the horizon. After weeks of pondering the frustrated sighting, he decided to climb to the highest point on the island, climbing the tallest tree he could find. Upstairs, for the first time, he had a panoramic view of the entire surroundings. From the top of the tree, Michael could see the full extent of the island, its beaches and headlands, and the vast ocean stretching as far as the eye could see. He studied every detail, devising strategies to increase his chances of being seen anywhere on the island. He decided to create visual and fire signals that could be seen from afar. He spent weeks collecting resources on the beach sand. Colored cloths he found, polished shards of glass that glistened in the sun and could reflect light, and pieces of wood to build bases for campfires. With the colored cloths, she also improvised a new outfit for herself, since hers were all completely torn. He set up several raised platforms with accumulations of stones and sticks along the beaches, ready to be lit at any sign of a sighting of a ship. He even dug grooves in the sand, filling them with coal or ash, forming giant letters that could be seen from the high seas. Months passed without any movement being spotted on the horizon. Michael began to feel the frustration grow again, but did not give up. Each day he revised his signs, adjusted his strategies, and kept hope alive. "We're gonna make it, buddy," he said to the pig, while the two watched another sunset on the horizon. "We can't give up now. They'll find us, I'm sure." Buddy grunted softly, as if he shared Michael's confidence and determination. Together, they continued their routine on the island, waiting for the day when they would finally be rescued from the isolation that had become their temporary home. And so, with each sunrise and sunset, Michael and Buddy kept the flame of hope burning, waiting for the moment when luck smiled at them and a ship finally appeared on the horizon. Years passed without another sighting of the ship. Only occasionally did planes cut through the sky above the island, leaving Michael with a mixture of hope and frustration. He had resigned himself to the fact that he could spend the rest of his life there, amid the constant challenges and relative prosperity he had achieved. Michael had built a new raft, more robust and resistant, and spent hours in the open sea, casting his nets and hooking large fish that guaranteed his food. He returned home with generous catches, a testament to his skills developed over the years of isolation. In quiet moments, when he was not busy with essential tasks, Michael spent hours looking at the horizon, waiting for a distress signal that never came. It was hard to keep hope alive, but the daily grind and challenges kept him busy and focused on his survival on that isolated island. Michael had learned to live in harmony with the wild nature of the island. Their hunting, fishing, and gathering skills improved every day. He explored new corners of the island, discovering berries, edible plants, and more efficient techniques for fishing. Each achievement was celebrated with a mixture of gratitude and longing for the world he had left behind. On quiet evenings, Michael would sit by the fire, sharing his thoughts with Buddy, the pig who had become his faithful companion. "You know, Buddy," he began one of these days, looking up at the twinkling stars in the dark sky, "sometimes I find myself wondering how things are on the other side. Does anyone still remember me?" Buddy grunted softly, as if he understood the melancholy in Michael's words. The pig, which grew strong and healthy alongside its human friend, had become a symbol of hope and companionship in the solitude of the island. "I know we're here for a reason," Michael continued, stroking Buddy's head. "Maybe there's something we need to learn or find before we can go home." The years had marked Michael deeply. His hair was now long and disheveled, his thick beard covering his sun-tanned face. His clothes, made of natural fibers and fabric scraps found on the beach, showed the signs of the time and hard work he had devoted to his survival. Every day on the island brought with it new learning and discoveries. Michael had learned to respect nature and to value every resource it offered. He had built more comfortable shelters, improved his hunting and fishing traps, and even explored mysterious caves that dotted the island's rocky coast. Even so, the desire to return to the world beyond that distant horizon persisted in his heart. He didn't know if he would ever be rescued, but he kept hope alive, fueled by the daily routine and love of life he and Buddy shared on that time-forsaken island. Many years have passed since Michael and Buddy became inseparable on the island. Buddy had grown strong and healthy alongside Michael, facing together the challenges and joys of life in that wild land. However, the ruthless time eventually came for Michael's faithful companion. It was a quiet afternoon when Michael realized something was wrong. Buddy, usually vigorous and alert, was lying in his makeshift shelter, breathing hard. His eyes, once full of vivacity, now had a look of weariness and pain. "No, Buddy," Michael whispered, kneeling down beside the pig. "You have to be okay. We overcome so many challenges together. You are my friend, my companion. You can't leave me now." Buddy looked at Michael with a sad look, as if he knew that his time on the island was coming to an end. He tried to get up, but his trembling legs barely supported him. Michael did his best to comfort his friend. He brought fresh water, stroked his head, and muttered words of encouragement, although deep down he knew that Buddy was leaving. As the sun slowly set over the horizon, Buddy took one last breath. His eyes closed slowly, and his body quieted. Michael held his paw affectionately, feeling a lump in his throat. "Thank you, Buddy," he said, his voice choking, "for everything. You were more than a pig to me. It was my friend. Go rest in peace," I said through tears that flowed incessantly. With a heavy heart, Michael carried the pig to a special place on the beach, where the sand was soft and the waves gently broke. He dug a makeshift grave for Buddy, surrounding it with wildflowers and seashells. As the moon rose in the dark sky, Michael stood by Buddy's grave, remembering the happy moments they shared. Tears rolled down his face, silent witnesses to the deep sadness he felt at the loss of his companion of so many years. In the days that followed, the loneliness on the island became more palpable and unbearable than ever. Michael felt Buddy's absence in every corner of his small home. The days seemed longer and quieter, and the nights darker without the comforting company of the pig he had learned to love. Michael was completely alone on the island after Buddy's death. The absence of the pig that had been his faithful companion for so many years left an unbearable void in his heart. The days dragged on slowly, and the nights were filled with a loneliness that seemed suffocating. Without Buddy's presence to share the daily chores and small joys, Michael felt lost. He continued his hunting, fishing, and gathering routines, but now each activity was marked by a heavy silence and deep sadness. In his spare time, Michael sat by the beach, looking at the distant horizon. He remembered the days when he had tried to get the attention of passing ships and the frustration of not being seen. Now the hope of being rescued seemed distant and unreal. At night, he lit his lonely fire and looked up at the stars, lost in thoughts about his former life. He remembered friends, family, and everything he had left behind. The island, which had once been a thrilling challenge, was now a prison that imprisoned him in his solitude. The days mingled in a numbing monotony. Michael found solace in Buddy's memories, in the moments they shared together. He talked to himself, seeking comfort in his own words as he faced the harsh reality of his situation. Over time, loneliness began to affect his sanity. He spent hours walking around the island, looking for any sign of life or hope. Sometimes he thought he heard distant voices or saw shadows moving among the trees, but they were only illusions of his tired mind. Michael knew he needed to find a way to deal with his loneliness before it was too late. He tried to keep himself busy, building new traps, exploring new areas of the island, and even writing in a makeshift journal to maintain his sanity. However, the pain of loss and constant loneliness were like a shadow that followed him at every step. He longed for a company that was no longer there, for a voice that no longer echoed in response to his words. Michael was on the verge of despair. Loneliness consumed him day after day. Buddy's death had been a devastating blow. He spent sleepless nights, the echo of his own voice on the deserted beach the only company he had. Each day dragged on as if it were an eternity, and Michael felt that he could no longer bear that isolation. With grim determination, he set about gathering the materials to build a new raft. Every movement was driven by a mixture of despair and hope, a desperate eagerness to escape from that lonely hell that had become their existence. He cut bamboos with trembling hands, tied ropes with a precision that reflected his urgency, and adjusted every detail of the raft with meticulous care. As I worked, I thought about how I was going to leave that island. The raft of years before had been a failed attempt, a bitter reminder of its impotence against the relentless forces of the sea. But this time it would be different. He promised himself that he would not give up, no matter how hard it was. Days turned into weeks, and the raft began to take shape. Michael built a makeshift awning to protect himself from the scorching sun, while working tirelessly to complete his work. Each night he watched the stars, mentally plotting the course he would take to escape the island. Finally, the day came when the raft was ready. Michael threw her overboard with a mix of anxiety and determination. He rowed hard, feeling his muscles burn with the effort. With each paddle, he moved further away from the beach that had been his prison for so many years. However, the raft faced difficulties. The waves were treacherous, the wind changed direction suddenly, and the sea seemed to conspire against their escape. Michael fought the forces of nature with all his might, his mind a tumultuous mixture of despair and hope. But then, as if fate was cruelly playing with him, a huge blow of wind turned the raft upside down. Michael was thrown into the rough sea, struggling to stay afloat as salt water invaded his lungs. He felt his strength slowly drain away, fatigue and frustration weighing down on him like an unbearable burden. In a last desperate effort, Michael tried to reach the overturned raft, but his legs were heavy, his arms exhausted. He knew he was losing the battle, and a wave of resignation enveloped him as he slowly sank into the darkness of the ocean. And so, the sea returned Michael to the beach that he had tried so hard to leave behind. His exhausted and soaked body was washed away by the tide, leaving a trail of hopelessness in the sand. The island had him back, as if mocking his audacious attempt to escape. That night, Michael lay on the cold sand, looking at the starry sky with empty eyes. The reality of her situation was more painful than ever. He had no more strength to fight, no hope of being rescued. Loneliness enveloped him like a shadow, and he knew he would never be the same. The morning after the failed escape attempt, Michael woke up desolate on the beach. The rising sun painted the sky with shades of orange and pink, but his eyes were dull and tired. He crawled away from the water, feeling empty and defeated. Sitting on the sand, his gaze lost in the horizon, Michael tried to process what had happened. The wrecked raft was a symbol of his shattered hopes, a cruel reminder of his inability to escape that lonely island. Tears rolled silently down his cheeks as he faced the harsh reality of his fate. "Buddy," Michael whispered to himself, the pig's name echoing softly in the morning breeze. Remembering his faithful friend brought a mixture of sadness and comfort. Buddy had been his only true companion in those years of isolation, and now he was alone again. The day dragged on slowly as Michael wandered along the beach, his footsteps heavy on the wet sand. He couldn't shake the feeling of helplessness that enveloped him. Every wave breaking on the shore seemed to whisper to him words of loneliness and hopelessness. By late afternoon, Michael returned to his camp. He lit a small fire, more out of habit than necessity, and sat down next to her. The crackling of the flames was the only thing that broke the oppressive silence of the night. Silent tears rolled down his face again as he looked up at the starry sky. The stars twinkled like tiny distant beacons, indifferent to the human suffering that went on beneath them. Michael felt small and insignificant before the vastness of the universe. "Why?" he muttered to the emptiness around him, his voice breaking with emotion. "Why can't I just get out of here? Why does everything have to be so difficult?" Questions echoed unanswered as the night wore on. Michael no longer had the strength to fight the relentless tide of his own existence. He wrapped himself in his torn blanket, trying to find comfort in the darkness that surrounded him. And so, Michael spent the night alone, battling his own inner demons and the overwhelming sadness that consumed him. Tomorrow would bring another day on that deserted island, and he would once again face the monotony and isolation that had become his reality. After a week since the raft incident, Michael was still visibly dejected and distraught. Sitting on the sand of the beach, he was still recovering emotionally from the failure of his escape attempt. The scorching midday sun battered his skin, and his thoughts swirled in a whirlwind of despair and loneliness. Suddenly, a flash on the horizon captured his attention. Michael frowned, trying to focus his weary vision on what seemed to be a distant point in the sea. His eyes stared intently, uncertain whether it was real or just a hallucination caused by heat and despair. The point became sharper as it approached. Michael held his breath as he finally recognized the distant shape of a ship cutting through the blue waters of the ocean. A mixture of hope and distrust flooded his heart. He blinked his eyes several times, trying to push away the idea that he might be dreaming. The ship was slowly approaching, and Michael remained motionless on the sand, unable to fully process what was happening. He wanted to believe that this vision was real, that someone had finally found him, but the years of loneliness had left deep marks on his mind. As the ship approached the shore, Michael saw signs of human activity on board. There were people moving in the vessel, and he could even hear the distant echo of voices carried by the wind. A mixture of emotions roiled his heart as he watched the ship approach closer and closer. Finally, when the ship was at a reasonable distance from the shore, Michael gathered all his strength. He rose from the sand, his muscles protesting against the effort. He frantically waved his arms and started screaming as loud as he could, drawing the attention of the crew on deck. To his immense gratification and relief, the ship responded. Reconnaissance signals were seen on the deck, and a small rescue boat was launched overboard. Michael could hardly believe the reality of it. He watched with tears in his eyes as the boat approached the shore, bringing him closer to the hope of a new beginning. When the boat finally reached the beach, Michael was helped on board by crew members. He was weak and exhausted from the last upsetting week, but the feeling of being rescued after so long was overwhelming. He looked back one last time, seeing the island that had been his home and his prison for so many years, before turning his gaze to the vast and unknown horizon ahead of him. As the ship drifted away from the island, taking Michael away from loneliness and despair, he knew his journey was far from over. But for the first time in years, he felt a spark of hope shining within him. "Thank you, buddy." He thanked me by blowing in the winds. In the city, days after Michael was rescued from the island, he was taken by authorities to give evidence at the police station. Upon arriving there, he was greeted by a crowd of reporters, cameras, and onlookers who wanted to know more about his incredible story of survival. Michael felt somewhat stunned by the sudden change of scenery after so many years of solitude. He was escorted by officers through the crowd to the inside of the police station. Inside, he was led to a room where he was waiting for an officer to begin his testimony. Sitting at the table, Michael looked around, still trying to assimilate everything that was happening. The white walls and the curious stares of the policemen made him feel strangely out of place. While waiting, a detective entered the room and introduced himself to Michael. He began asking questions about how Michael had survived on the island, what resources he had found, how he had fed, and how he had built his shelters. Michael recounted everything he could remember, describing his struggles and his triumphs during the years of isolation. After giving his initial statement, Michael was informed about what had happened to his former friends. He was shocked to discover that Peter had hanged himself in prison and that Tom, after 2 decades, had finally changed his statement, revealing where they had left Michael to die. Sarah and James were also arrested. The authorities explained that for all these years they believed that Michael was dead. The discovery of his rescue had been a turning point for everyone, and it was striking that even after 2 decades he was still alive. Michael felt a mixture of emotions upon hearing about the fate of his traitorous friends. Part of him still harbored resentment, but another part was relieved to finally know the truth. As the legal process continued and Michael adjusted to civilized life again, he knew he would have a lot to process and overcome. The experience on the island had left deep marks, but it had also awakened a resilience within him that he had never known he possessed. In the days that followed, Michael was approached by various media outlets, all eager to hear his story. He was treated like a survival hero, But he knew the true story of his journey was far more complex than any headline could capture. As Michael began to rebuild his life and deal with the aftermath of his rescue, he found comfort in those who supported him and the opportunity to start over. The island and its years of solitude would always remain in his memory, but now he looked to the future with a new determination and hope. Despite having survived and being back in civilization, he found himself in the midst of a society he did not fully understand. The urban bustle, the crowds, and the fast pace of everyday life were overwhelming for someone who had spent so many years in solitude. With the money he got after settling all the legal issues and receiving compensation, Michael made a decision that surprised many. He bought a secluded place, surrounded by lush forests and away from the hustle and bustle of the city. It was a quiet place where he could find peace and serenity without the complete isolation he had faced on the island. The site was not only a refuge, but also an opportunity for Michael to reconnect with nature in a way he never could amid the skyscrapers and concrete of the city. He decided to dedicate himself to raising pigs, a choice that reminded him of his faithful companion, Buddy, who had helped him so much on the island. Michael's days were now filled with caring for animals, cultivating the land, and maintaining the estate. He found satisfaction in the simplicity and quiet routine of field work. At night, under the starry sky and away from the city lights, he reflected on his journey and how life can change in unexpected ways. Despite returning to civilization, Michael carried with him the lessons of survival and resilience he had learned on the island. He valued every moment of peace and solitude, but he also appreciated the presence of nature around him and the freedom to live according to his own rhythm. As the years passed, Michael found his balance between the past and the present, between the solitude of the island and the peace of the place. He knew that he would never forget the years lost on the island, but he also learned to appreciate the present and look to the future with hope and gratitude for each new day given to him. Thank you very much to those who have supported the channel financially through the link in the comment pinned. This helps me to bring more and more stories to you. And don't forget to like and also subscribe to continue receiving the new stories.